Hello, my name is Brian Zanghi from Nestle Purina, and thank you very much for listening to my talk today. I'm going to be talking about feline hydration, specifically how a water supplement can be used as a hydration solution for cats. Very briefly, I'll go into a couple of slides on some key definitions that I'll be using during the course of the presentation. I'll also then go into two studies that we published in 2018 on our water supplement research in cats, and then provide a brief summary based on how this data can be applied in a clinical setting. So we traditionally will have used water or wet food or diets enriched with sodium to have a strategy for increasing total water intake for a cat. But this research now begins to indicate that we can have another approach by leveraging a water supplement for stimulating or increasing water intake. So some of the definitions I was referring to, I'll be showing some data where I'm describing it as liquid intake. This is, or also free liquid intake, the water that's drank out of the bowl. Now this can be both tap water or drinking of the nutrient water or the water supplement. And that differs specifically from data where it will be total water intake. And this is the combination of tap water or the water component of the water supplement, taking the dry matter components out, and then adding that to the metabolic water, as well as water consumed as dietary moisture. So those three components added up to what we refer to total water intake. Now, with regards to the units of the data, some of the more historical data would report water intake with regards to just total milliliters per day and not taking into account on a kilogram body weight basis. More recent studies have started to provide this understanding of total water intake and reporting it on a kilogram body weight basis. So for dry food, we typically see in the literature cats are drinking 20 to 30 milliliters of total water from all three sources per day, as opposed to wet food, where it's about 35 milliliters per kilogram body weight per day. And then the final set of definitions, the nutrient water that we evaluated in this study contains what are referred to as organic osmolytes. So electrolytes are considered osmolytes, amino acids, other molecules or nutrients like sugar, glycerol, those are also considered osmolytes. But the glycerol, the sugar, amino acids are specifically organic osmolytes, and those are the nutrients that we wanted to use in this water supplement and not electrolytes specifically. So when I'm referring to nutrient-enriched water, it's because these nutrients are organic osmolytes that we're using to support increased water intake and then, once in the body, absorption into the cells. So the first study, just very briefly, our key objective was we wanted to evaluate this water supplement offered ad libitum to the cats. And if it was offered to the cat, would they have enhanced liquid intake with the nutrient enriched water supplement versus having access to only tap water? And then what if intake was elevated with the nutrient water, would this be a sustained level of intake over a prolonged period of time? And we're defining that as 2 months. Our preliminary work indicated that over a 2-week period, we were seeing increased intake with the nutrient water, but we wanted to evaluate on a longer term basis. And then finally, does this enhanced liquid intake of a nutrient water translate into increased or influence the urine parameters of these healthy cats where they're consuming a dry food? And this data was published as our first study in 2018. So very briefly on the study design, we had 1 week of baseline intake where we were getting water intake when they only had access to the tap water, as well as their food consumption to allow us to track dietary moisture, water intake, as well as their metabolic water intake. Then we move into the one and a half weeks of the start of the test phase, where again we were able to measure total water intake because we measured food on a daily basis, as well as their liquid intake. So for the nutrient water group, they only had access to the nutrient water or the water supplement, and substituted that out for their tap water. And the reason being is that we knew from the preliminary data that the nutrient water acceptance was very high. So there was very little concern in removing tap water and replacing it with nutrient water, versus a control group where they had tap water over the entire course of the study. Now, when we go from after the first week and a half into the final 6.5 weeks, we're looking at a 3-bowl feeding option where they have now been given their tap water back. So they have access to tap water and their nutrient water and their food. And the reason why we evaluated this is the food was not measured on a daily basis because the cats were group housed. And so they had ad libitum to access to the food that was in a separate location. But on the automated food measuring system, there were 2 scales. One had tap water and the other side had the nutrient water. So now we could be able to delineate how much of their total liquid intake was tap water and how much of it was their nutrient water. Now through this particular study, again, they had access to the nutrient water and the tap water all day long. And we had made sure that the water bowls were filled so they had free access to it and could drink as much as they wanted. So to summarize the results, looking at the red table on the bottom, when we report the data as total milliliters per day, very typical in terms of the control group that was consuming the tap water, 90 milliliters per day, very similar to what we see with cats drinking regular tap water when they're eating a dry food diet. It's approximately 90 to 100 milliliters per day. But with the nutrient water group, we're getting a 67% increase, where the average total liquid intake was 148 milliliters. Now, when we convert that to a kilogram body weight basis of just the free liquid that's ingested during that first week and a half of the test phase, 20 versus 33 milliliters per kilogram body weight. And then because we measured all 3 water sources, we're able to calculate daily total water intake during that first week and a half. And that's where we get this 25.1 milliliters of total water, or 37.5 milliliters of total water for the nutrient water group. And in all of those cases, being significantly higher liquid consumption with the test group. Now, how does that translate into the urine output parameters? We can see urine output volume is 15 milliliters per kilogram body weight versus the control, which is 10 milliliters per day. Then this also, not only are they having more urine output, but they're also more diluted urine, 0.04 for the nutrient water group versus 0.054. So a significant increase in urine dilution. Going into the second study, so because we had some cats that really, really liked the nutrient water, we felt it was really important to understand how liquid intake would be impacted by a very specific dose of the nutrient water. And then how do different doses impact urine output parameters? And so that was the basic premise of this, is to look at incrementally increasing levels of the dose over a period of time, in this case, either 10 or 17 days. And then does that increasing level of availability of the nutrient water translate to increasing changes in their urine output parameters? And this study was also published in 2018. So to go through the experimental design so you can have an understanding of how we defined the dose. During week 1, or I should say during period 1, we all cats had access to their tap water and their food. So each cat was its own water intake control. And from that individual cat's tap water intake during period 1, we're able to determine what the 1x dose would be during period 2. So for example, if a cat on average drank 100 milliliters per day of tap water during the baseline period 1, then they would also receive 100 milliliters of the nutrient water during period 2, as well as free access to as much tap water as they wanted to consume. So that's where the 1x comes from, 100 milliliters of nutrient water, which is relative to their 100 milliliters per day of tap water intake. And so if you take that forward, 1.5 being 150 milliliters as an example per day, and then 2x, 200 milliliters per day of the nutrient water during those different test periods. Again, this for the nutrient water group, that is a 3-bowl feeding option. So they had access to the tap water all day long. The nutrient water was divided where they got half of that dose volume in the morning and the other half in the afternoon. And then, so we'll go through. So that's how the dosing structure works. The nutrient water was exactly the same in the second study as we used in the first study. So exactly same liquid composition there, with organic osmolytes being glycerol and amino acids from whey and the poultry flavor. So here's the data with regards to total liquid ingested. We can see that the tap water consumption is very consistent over the course of the entire study. And when you look at the nutrient water group, during the first test phase, which is period 2, we're seeing an average increase that's fairly consistent with the 1x dose of nutrient water provided along with the tap water. And then when you go to period 3, the dose is increased, which you can see on the right-hand side. The 1x dose on average for the nutrient water group goes from 26 milliliters in period 2 to 39 in period 3, and up to 52 milliliters per kilogram body weight per day. And so with those increasing doses, we're seeing an increasing level of total liquid being drank. Now, how that translates, or to better understand what that total liquid intake reflects, because they also had access to tap water, this graph shows us that increase in total liquid intake on the left reflects an increased level because of their high preference for the nutrient water. And so then this graph shows that their tap water consumption is going down, and is a smaller portion of that total liquid intake. And we feel like it's also important because this demonstrates that when the cats don't have access to the nutrient water, they are still consuming tap water over the course of the remainder of the day. And then how this translates into their urine measures. This graph in the urine-specific gravity, so no difference during baseline, all basically the same. But then as the nutrient water is added and they're increasing that intake of nutrient water and their total liquid consumption is increasing, we're getting a corresponding dilution of the urine-specific gravity. And I don't have the graph on here, but indicated on the bottom, there's a very similar response in terms of except in an increasing volume of urine output that's occurring with the increased availability and increased intake of the nutrient water. So we're getting increased dilution, more liquid they consume, and we're also getting more urine output. This is the data where we took all of the data and we tried to model it to understand how the response could be applied clinically if we were trying to predict the particular dose for that individual pet relative to their urine measures. And so on the first graph, we've got urine output versus urine-specific gravity. Clearly, we can see this nice curvilinear response. As we have a more dilute urine, we're going to see this corresponding increase in the urine output volume to be able to predict approximately where that value is. Now, if we go to the curve on the left, on the right, so if we take an average target urine-specific gravity of 0.035 as something that we would say, we would want to be ideal for dilution purposes, healthy level of urine concentration, that then translates into approximately 37 milliliters of total water intake per day on all three sources of water. And then how that becomes where we could translate that into estimating how much urine they would be voiding every single day based on these different intake levels. I've got here on the line, if we use that same level from the previous graph, 36, 37 milliliters of total water per day, that translates into approximately 15 milliliters per kilogram of urine output per day. And then on the bottom, I've got it bracketed to be able to show, relative to the published literature, where our control data is with tap water consumption, how that translates into total water output, and then how we can then infer approximately how much urine the cat is producing per day as we try to define where's the right dose that we want to be in to get a desired effect of how much flushing of the bladder we would want to produce to get that improved hydration effect for that particular patient. So with that, I'll summarize. Again, we're demonstrating that with increased level of the liquid dose, we get an increased intake of total water as well as increased drinking, and this results in a greater urine dilution factor. The table here shows that, with dry food, traditionally 20 to 30 milliliters of total water versus wet food at 35. And with the use of this water supplement, we can be at or a much better level of total liquid or total water intake relative to wet food consumption. And clearly, there's many opportunities where a cat would benefit from increased liquid intake, and a liquid supplement like this could provide that benefit if you're looking for increased total hydration, increased urine volume output, or dilution of the urine parameters. So, evidence that water supplement is a viable strategy to wet food or a higher sodium diet, which trigger thirst sensation. And so with that, I'll conclude, and I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to the presentation. Have a good day.